At starting position of clean pull, I begin with feet hip width and toes under bar. However, my torso reach forward, causing an upper back rounding and anterior load shift. This limited posterior chain engagement, and to correct this, I would emphasize cues like chest up, sit back into glutes, and open chest, which would help redistribute load to the hips and reinforce proper hinge mechanics. During concentric phase, I noticed early knee flexion without a sufficient hip hinge, which would reduce vertical force production. I would also cue getting those hips through, which would be an ideal cue since the sequence should be hip and knee extension followed by a plantar flexion and scapular elevation, which is that shrugging to ears movement. The bar should return eccentrically to that 3/4 quad position just above the knees. To reinforce proper mechanics, I recommend a regression and isometric hold at the 3/4 quad position for 3 to 5 seconds, which builds awareness of load distribution and postural control without jump or shrug. This is a foundational Olympic derivative used to develop vertical force through the hips, knees, and ankles, critical for spurs performance. Primary goals include rate of force development, posterior chain power, and efficient energy transfer across the kinetic chain. Now we have the high pull, which is also an Olympic derivative that develops vertical power through the triple extension. It would be triple extension would be hip, knee, and ankle, and the ankle would technically be at plantar flexion. However, it's followed by a scapular elevation to a shoulder abduction and elbow flexion. It's designed to improve rate of force development, upper body and lower body coordination, and transfer power through that kinetic chain. In my execution, I noticed that during the eccentric phase, I relied too heavily on my quads and shins, underutilizing the posterior chain. This anterior bias led to overcompensation of my upper body, and I began pulling the bar before even reaching full hip extension. While the movement appeared synchronized, this compensation pattern could increase injury risk under heavier loads due to poor sequencing. To correct this, I'd cue get those hips through, sit back onto glutes, or even guide the bar, don't pull the bar. Rather than regressing, I'd actually increase the load slightly to force proper sequencing to put emphasis on hip and knee extension and drive the bar vertically rather than muscling it up with my arms. At the start position of the hang clean, the hip width stance and thumbs wrapped around the bar are good. I started with a hang pull to reinforce upper body mechanics. However, I feel that the extension of the hips, relying heavily on knee flexion and dorsiflexion, which shifted my center of mass forward, reducing posterior chain engagement. At the catch, I curled the bar, elbows dropped below parallel, and the bar was stabilized by my arms and not a braced trunk, indicating limited shoulder and wrist mobility. To correct these tendencies, I'd cue extend at the hip or keep elbows parallel. I want to focus on increasing neuromuscular patterning through repeated exposures to the same movement. This movement is designed to reinforce the hip cycle and train vertical power through a rapid concentric extension, followed by a fast eccentric flexion into the catch. It targets rate of force development, neuromuscular coordination, and efficiency energy transfer across the kinetic chain, especially for athletes who need to absorb and redirect force quickly. So now we had that starting position of the split jerk. Stance was too narrow, immediately cueing feet hip width apart to improve base stability. As I dipped eccentrically, my center of mass shifted forward and my heels lifted. We want a faster dip with the rapid transition into that overhead stance. I wasn't engaging my core, and you can also see that my anterior pelvic tilt, we want more of that posterior tilt through that trunk bracing. My front leg stabilized well, but the back leg was too far behind center, creating an uneven weight distribution. I also lack depth due to my limited hip mobility, which increased pressure on my lower back. To correct these faults, I would cue brace the core, even split, dip faster, stacked wrist. I would focus on maximum extension drills that emphasize fast eccentric braking forces. In the split jerk, the bar should drop to a position close to the start height, around eye level. Timing in the press is crucial, especially since I have wrist limitations, so I would want to avoid excessive pressing and reinforce stacked wrist alignment for the safe overhead stabilization. It's also important to train the split jerk on both sides, leading left and right, to reduce asymmetrics and improve bilateral coordination and ensure even motor patterning, balancing hip flexor activation and better transfer to sport movements like sprinting and jumping while reducing overuse stress and injury risks. This also optimizes vertical power transfer through the kinetic chain, emphasizes full hip extension and rapid front leg punch to stabilize that overhead position. For athletes, the goal is fast, explosive movements with control, proper sequencing, and correct positioning to maximize force output and prevent injury. Now for push press, which is a primarily extension and stability drill that trains athletes to generate vertical force through the kinetic chain. It reinforces triple extension and demands trunk stiffness to stabilize that overhead position. The movement relies on proper sequencing to optimize power transfer and reduce injury risk. My starting position, I had a feet hip width apart, thumbs wrapped around the bar. Main issue was a lack of synchronization during that dip and drive. I dipped too slowly, causing me to miss that stretch and shortening cycle, which is a rapid eccentric concentric transition that allows for explosive force production. Since I didn't take advantage of that quick dip, I overcompensated with upper body strength, causing that bar to shift slightly backward at lockout. I lacked lat and core engagement, which compromised trunk stability. At the top position, my knees extended, but the hips stayed hinged. I didn't finish with full hip extension. To correct this, I would cue getting those hips through dip faster, which will follow by an immediate drive and rapid regrounding of the feet.